First of all, let's all have a deep breath together, maybe 2 or 3. I might need 4 or 5, but I'll take 2 or 3. And also, while you're breathing, silence your cell phones. My mic should be a little closer, okay. So first of all, welcome. I am really, really deeply moved by how many of you have traveled from near and very, very far from all parts of the United States and even from Europe to celebrate the life of Lee Knefelkamp, my dearest partner, spouse, friend for over 30 years. Among the travelers, I especially want to call out Lee's beloved sister, of whom she talked often, who does not travel very much, and who had to make a great effort to leave her 20 horses behind on a beautiful, very remote farm in the corner of Minnesota. And there we had many happy visits. In a minute, we will be swaying to Zorba's dance. I chose this music to bring us together because Lee and I bonded almost immediately when she told me of her love for Kazantzakis. She had a whole collection that she showed me, who wrote Zorba, the novel. And I shared her passion. I had a whole collection of Theodorakis, who wrote the music for the film. And while Lee was shy to dance in public, she loved this music and used to dance to it. And to prove it, if you've looked outside, you can see pictures of her with great abandon dancing. And many of you who are here were dancing with her. This was when she first came to the University of Maryland. So now I'm going to ask you to stand, please. Unless you can't stand, if you really feel you need to sit. Take the hand of the person next to you. And just as you hear this music, and sway if you feel like it, if you're so moved to sway. I don't see how you could not be, but just in case. Just think of Lee and how she loved this music and loved everyone here, and how happy she would be to see you all here.
Teach me to dance, will you?
Did you say dance? Come on, my boy.
I had planned to write an academic biography of Lee, but I did not. I think I channeled Lee. Anyone who ever worked with Lee knows how much she hated paperwork and forms. So instead, at the back of your program, I have Xeroxed off, there were many excellent write-ups about Lee from the AACU and other organizations. I chose the one posted by Columbia University Teachers College because it was really the most thorough and is really like so thorough a biography of her that she herself couldn't have written. So I Xeroxed it off for you. I've also given you, if you're wondering what that little purple and yellow thing is, it's a bookmark that was made called Listening to Understand from speeches that Lee gave or writings that was distributed by the College of St. Catherine, who valued Lee's words so much, they made thousands of these and gave them out to students and at conferences. So you each have one. I know some of you are not yet retired and are still working with students. I have a whole bunch extra if you want to take some to your university to give out. So, or just if you want them, I don't know what, make a collage. So now we come to the more serious part. As I have said many times, I would not be who I have become without Lee. Our support of each other was unwavering and mutual. We loved each other deeply and complexly. Of course, we had our differences. And private as she was, Lee would be horrified that I would even mention such a thing in public. But as I said to myself today, I'm in charge. Born on April 16, 1945 in Winthrop, Massachusetts, as Lorraine Lee Boudreau. On her mother's side, she was of Nova Scotian heritage, and they used to use the middle name for the real name, so, in the Boudreau. She died actually on yesterday's date, September 7th, 2018. Eerily, this is the exact date of her first marriage. It was to Lemoyne Knefelkamp, from whom she got her name, whom she met in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica, where they served for 3 years. Her body took a lot of hits when she was in the Peace Corps, but she loved the work, talked about it all her life. While Macalester College had been like a magic dream, and these are her words, with professors who owned rooms full of books and had real art on their walls. And once we had our own home established, she said, that's what we have now, just like those professors at Macalester. In those days, professors invited people into their homes, especially at a small liberal arts college. But her work in the Peace Corps, which gave her a real dose of real politics, strengthened her determination never ever to let go of a vision of the world as it could be, never simply to accept it as it was. Lee was a child of World War II, of the military, attending 16 schools in half as many years, an experience that marked her for life. Horses and books saved her. Throughout her life, friends from books lived in her and sustained her. Don Quixote, to surrender dreams, this may be madness. Anne of Green Gables, kindred spirits are not as scarce as I used to think. The Little Prince, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Winnie the Pooh, she loved beyond all others. You don't spell love, you feel it. And it was a good thing, too, because she was a terrible speller all the way. With Adrienne Rich, she dreamed of a common language, and with John Dewey, that education is not preparation for life, it is life itself. And she often quoted Bill Perry, whose work she embellished. When intelligent people do stupid things, there are powerful forces at work. We often said that to each other. And she came to understand that, like Kazantzakis, her warriors would be the 26 letters of the alphabet. She became a complex thinker, creating tools to measure and further students' development and campus climate. She always worked to bring the seemingly disparate together, within herself and in the world. In her essay, Living in the In-Between, she wrote, "I have a will to be whole." Her own experiences led her to her life's work on diversity, and I think with all the honorary doctorates she got, she was most proud of the Medal for Work in Diversity that she got from the University of Michigan. But the horse whisperer was still present in the brilliant public speaker she became. She was called a national treasure. Lee protested war, but was angry at those who thoughtlessly denigrated everyone in the military. She was proud to teach at West Point and in the Air Force Academy. For years, without financial recompense, she taught at Bedford Maximum Security Prison for women. She was brilliant at dissolving resistance to new ways of thinking and was not afraid to be out as a lesbian and a Jew. And she could also create a spectacular marriage ceremony, as she did when she officiated at the wedding of her beloved Adam Schneider and his wife, Ashley. She did not birth any children, but was deeply connected to my children and to the families they created. And they are here, most of them. When I talk about Lee so intimately, I truly forget that she's gone from this world and not simply commuting to New York. And I'm moved by how many of you who are here today could appropriately have been asked to speak, had we but whirled enough in time. Yet a few of you, I hope, will speak at the end. We've left a little space for those who spontaneously may want to come up here and say something. And now I will turn the program over to our dear friend, Jo Radner, a consummate storyteller who already told me she's not going to tell any stories, so don't be disappointed. But that's how I wanted to introduce her. And she has kindly offered to serve as MC. Of this choice, Lee would definitely approve.
Thank you so much, Evie. I am so honored to be part of this gathering. Lee and Evie and Sue and I were family. Over the last couple of decades, whenever we came together from various areas, right before we parted, we had a ritual. We would stand together in a little square with a camera and take a picture of our 8 feet. I think maybe we were planning that they would all be back together again soon. And as I look around here, I see so many families in which Lee was a beloved member. It's astonishing. It's like an unthinkable, mind-boggling Venn diagram, all of us. And because we are so different and had such a closeness to Lee in so many different ways, I think that makes our gathering even more powerful as we do the work of this afternoon, the wonderful work of memory. And every story that we tell here in this room, every story we tell downstairs at the reception, every story you tell on the way home, even more important, every story that you hear here and retell to somebody else goes to nourish that tree of memory, that Lee tree that's going to sustain and shelter us for a long time to come. Evie wanted us to begin this part of our storytelling by singing together. So I'm going to ask Sue Lancer and Nina Beck and Loretta Sachs, to come up here and help us start Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom Bimorah, Thank you so much. I think one of the wonderful things about this program is its punctuation with music. Thank you, Evie, for all this planning. Our first storyteller is Rabbi Bob Sachs. He was the Hillel rabbi at the University of Maryland when Lee was a professor there, and she worked very closely with him for her conversion to Judaism. And one story that I have heard that I will pass along was that when Evie joined the faculty at the University of Maryland, Bob shyly suggested, was you shy? That he might know of a nice Jewish girl for Lee. But it was too late. Lee and Evie had already found each other. Bob Sachs.
Some years ago, a faculty member at the University of Maryland walked into my office on the fringe of the campus and brought me the gift of a relationship which would be the most rewarding of all those I had in my 20-some years as a campus chaplain. She was 33, not yet tenured, just beginning a brilliant academic career. She was, she told me, interested in learning more about Judaism, which she had already begun to explore on her own. Thus began many months during which I would serve as her reference librarian and conversational partner. College Park has many lovely tree-lined streets. We soon found that walking together side by side and chatting about our place in God's world and God's place in ours worked best for us. We had much to discuss. Lee was reading deep and challenging works far beyond the simple introductions to Judaism I gave to others. Walter Kaufman's Critique of Religion and Philosophy, Heschel's God in Search of Man, Cecil Roth's History of the Jews, Buber's I and Thou. I had to swim really fast sometimes to keep up with Lee in these challenging waters in which she swam so easily. The rabbi of the Talmud said, "I have learned more from my students than they have learned from me." That was certainly my case with Lee, although perhaps she might disagree. One thing she taught me, and shared often in talks she gave through the years, is that the biblical urging, "be fruitful and multiply," need not be thought of only in biological terms. She offered the broader psychological concept, generativity, to encompass not only biological fruitfulness, but also the fruitfulness of one's hands and mind and heart to build and sustain the world and to care for one's community and for humanity. In my later 2 decades as a rabbi serving the Jewish GLBT community, I drew on Lee's wisdom often as I delighted in the gifts of hand, heart, and mind of so many in the congregation. Lee generated goodness and kindness, wisdom and love. I bless the day when we first met.
Thank you so much, Bob. It was a match. Our next storyteller will be Anne Farron, who was a close colleague of Lee's at American University and also at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. She's now retired from academia, but she's still consulting in higher education. Anne.
The theme of my remarks is gifts, and I see that once again we think alike in some way. So it seems to me that people give 3 kinds of gifts. They give the gifts they think you should have. My mother-in-law gave me a double boiler for my birthday. And then there are the gifts that they want to have. That's when someone gives you and your family the great big television set just in time for the Super Bowl. And then there are the gifts they know that you will enjoy. And it's the third type of gift that Lee gave all the time. She was generous. When we needed new ideas, Lee was there. As you know and you have heard and you can read, her public legacy is lasting and diverse, with projects ranging from those on American commitments and democracy to her graduate program work at West Point. When we needed effective teaching strategies, she gave us insights into student development, and she always reminded us to visit John Dewey's marker in Vermont. When we struggled to reflect on our values and experiences, she gave us the Personal and Social Responsibility Index. We refer to it as the PSRI for the inside world. And then there was her famous 1990 speech on the seasons of an academic life. That was the first time I had ever experienced a standing ovation for a speech on higher education. I am told that Lee got many of those over time. But what made Lee's words so powerful was that from her own vulnerability, she acknowledged our feelings about the ups and downs and pettiness and heroism of academic life. She gave us intellectual gifts, gifts of ideas. Lee also gave tangible and beautiful and frivolous, whimsical gifts. For special events or for no reason at all, she just thought you would like it. She sent flowers, she brought cookies, she gave children's books, she prepared wonderful salmon. One of my favorite gifts was a hand puppet of a rabbit pulled out of a top hat. It was to mark the approval after 2 years of struggle of a general education program at American University. Her gift, another gift I loved, was a nest of Russian dolls made up of Alice in Wonderland characters, down to the smiling Cheshire Cat, which was her way of explaining the deepening process of a long-term Greater Expectations project designed to transform undergraduate education. Lee appreciated quality in clothes, jewelry, art, poetry, books, food, horses, and people. After one summer institute in Newport, Rhode Island, we toured the fancy shops, and she saw me admiring a sapphire pendant. I'm thinking, not going to happen. I don't even have my purse with me. She pulled out her credit card from her Vineyard Vines pullover, saying, "You can pay me back. I know you will enjoy it." And I have. It always reminds me of Lee, but more important, how she helped me understand that owning things, seeing things, experiencing things that you enjoy is not self-indulgent, but joyous living. Many of us in this room have received her gifts, and that's how we know that Lee was not just thinking of us, but she understood us and she appreciated us. The most precious gift Lee gave me was time. No matter where we lived or how far apart, from 1986 to last year, we kept up through emails, annual meetings, summer institutes, sharing hotel rooms in snowstorms and struggling with overhead projectors and her endless piles of handouts. Through it all, Lee was this determined mix of anxiety and anticipation about what she would learn. She had a gentle way of making me take myself seriously as an educator, a colleague, and a friend. When we both returned to DC after almost 20 years away, we fell into a pattern of late afternoon phone conversations and 3-hour brunches. We talked about growing up, growing old, what we cared about, what we worried about, what made us happy. You all know how Lee could be so fully in the moment, to listen, to ask the right question, to make you laugh, and never look at her watch or indicate that there was any place else she would rather be than with you. So it seems to me that when we give to others the gifts of ideas, appreciation, and time, asking for nothing in return, we honor Lee.
Thank you for that gift, Dan. Marge Piercy's poem, To Be of Use, was a poem that Lee loved so much that she carried a tiny version of it with her, carefully encased in plastic, in her wallet at all times. Sue Lancer is going to read it for us.
Not in plastic. To be of use. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust, but the thing worth doing, well done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real.
Thank you. Very much work that is real. Our next speaker will be Mark Hicks. He was Lee's student at Columbia Teachers College and then became a very close colleague. He's now Angus MacLean Professor of Religious Education at Meadville Lombard Theological School and Director of the Foz Collective, a laboratory for innovation in faith formation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know how many of you are familiar with black male culture, but one of the conventions of our culture is to nod one's head when you see another brother. So this happens everywhere on the streets and meetings at church. It happens everywhere. The gesture takes on particular importance when you are in company of, well, white people, right? The gesture is important because what it says, brother to brother, is that I see you. You matter. You're not alone. It's going to be okay. So it was quite a surprise when I entered Lee's graduate classrooms on adult development at Teachers College, and upon entering that room, experiencing this short, serious white woman with a crew cut who gave me a brother's nod. Whoa, what kind of person is this, right? Well, it's taken me 28 years to fully understand the impact of that nod. But it was a gesture that signaled an adventure was about to begin, and it would be a life-changing adventure. Lee and I quickly developed a rapport, and after I completed my master's degree, she sat down with me as a conversation partner, not only about which academic road would help me to achieve my professional goals, but which pathway would best help me figure out my life. I suspect many of you in this room have been gifted a book or a card or a piece of art from Lee, so you know that she wanted your soul to soar. She wanted you to be all that you could be. For me, this gift was the words of Nikos Kazantzakis, Spiritual Exercises. a couple of these. And I strive to discover how to signal to my companions before I die, how to give them a hand, how to spell out for them in one complete word at least, to tell them what I think this procession is and toward what we go. Let us create. Let us give human meaning to the superhuman struggle. So this young black gay male, in the process of coming out, of emerging and engaging the work of becoming a professional human being, was brought into shape. I was blessed over the 28 years I figured out. I thought it was 18, but wow, that didn't work, right? But I was blessed over these years to figure out that often in Lee's company, there were many encounters to be held. My Southern mother didn't like collard greens, so one of my favorite times was Wednesday nights going to Cafe 107 in Harlem, eating fried chicken, collards, and some rum-infused libation that Lee kind of loved, I think. Or perhaps it was an outing to consider the meaning of Angels in America, or to bear witness to Eartha Kitt at the Carlisle Room, or to spiral in wonderment at one of Maxine Green's salons on the state of education. With Lee, I figured out that the life of the mind, was not just taking the heads on our shoulders to the next intellectual gab fest, but moving our bodies into spaces that help make meaning of our lives. As powerful as all of those moments were, and now you know where all the money went, Lee, right? I think, right? It was the deeply spiritual questions that only a developmental spiritualist could ask that kept me then and now in a manner of being intrigued. I remember a taxi ride where, off the cuff, she asked me where I thought our hard-earned insights go after we die. Or on another occasion when making meaning about, shall we call them diversity-challenged people, who would gesture in displeasure at our being together in each other's company. So it was that this Black Baptist turned Unitarian Universalist gay philosopher came of age. And now as a professor leading a progressive nonprofit, I find that Lee's influence is all over my work. When I think about how to transform graduate classrooms into a learning community, it's Lee's ideas that shape my world. When I mentored new faculty and staff, it's Lee's powerful gestures of love and commitment that give me influence about how to guide my behavior. When it's time to use my voice to bring the margins to the center, it's her example that empowers me. Lee taught me how important it was to let people know that they matter in the deepest sense of the word. So to answer your question, Lee, 28 years later, the brilliance of your ideas, of who you are, is alive in me today. I am forever grateful. Lee Knefelkamp, lauded my way. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much for bringing so much of the meaning of Lee to us today. Our next teller will be Deborah Humphreys, a colleague of Lee's at AAC&U who became a close personal friend of Lee's. She's currently Vice President for Strategic Engagement at the Lumina Foundation.
So I can't actually recall the very first time I met Lee, and it's been driving me crazy that I just can't remember. But I'm pretty sure it was around 1994 or 1995. Lee was part of an amazing group of people who were members of a project called American Commitments. And they had formed something called the National Leadership Council, and I think at least one member of that council is in the room today. I was a brand new staff member at AAC&U, and I was still a graduate student, and I was in awe of the brain power of the group. But Lee, of course, made me feel welcome and valued in the group immediately. She had this incredible ability to make you feel like you belonged and were equal and valuable in every way, no matter where you were. And we began at that time what became a friendship like no other one I've ever had. Over the course of many decades of that friendship, I came to believe that there were three things that I think Lee was better at than anyone I know. First, as you've already heard from others, she really knew how to be a friend. She was unfailingly loyal, loving, generous with her gifts, unjudgmental, and always my biggest cheerleader, even when I stumbled and made mistakes, which were many. She supported me no matter what, and most of all, as others have said, she listened. And as she put it in those amazing lectures and classes, she really knew how to listen to understand, which was on that little card. Second thing she was that was better than anyone else I knew was, of course, the best teacher I've ever known. And I'm really jealous, Mark, because I never got to be one of her official students. But those of you who were certainly lucky indeed. Unofficially, however, she taught me so much. She taught me about what it means to be a friend, what it means to be a fair and just person in the world, what it means to listen to understand, and especially what it takes to be open to new experiences and opinions while still holding strong to one's values and convictions. She also taught me what it takes sometimes to change one's mind. And she could, like we see so rarely today, suspend judgment and really listen to different points of view of the people around her. And relating to that last item, the third thing she was really good at was learning. So she was an incredible teacher, but she also was an amazing learner. And she was amazing at translating what she learned into new opportunities to teach others. She was always on the hunt for new lessons that she could bring into her teaching and learning. So at the end of the work of the American Commitments Project, Lee organized the entire National Leadership Group to give each of the staff members a gift, of course. They had worked for years, this group, for plowing through some of the best scholarship on issues of diversity and equity and then writing some brilliant reports. And so she chose for each of us a quote from the work that they had been working on, and she had the quotes framed with beautiful calligraphy, and all the Leadership Council members signed the sheet. So I have that framed quote, and it's hanging above my desk, and it has been there across a number of desks and jobs for more than 20 years. So the quote on mine was, of course, as has been mentioned already, from John Dewey, a favorite of hers. And the quote is, "Interest in learning from all the contacts of life is the essential moral interest." And as I read it a lot. It's literally right over my desk. And I think of Lee all the time. And she really did that in a way that I don't think I've ever seen anyone else do. She translated what she learned from such a wide array of sources into these amazing lectures and lessons she gave to students and audiences across the country that others have already mentioned. And whether it was the most sophisticated book of feminist scholarship or psychological research, or the latest pop culture gossip in People magazine, which she totally loved, or the most juicy and fun cable television show, she was able to draw lessons and to find nuggets of truth, and as have already been mentioned, huge sources of joy and laughter. And I was always so excited when I got to introduce her to something like that she hadn't found yet. She had not been watching The Crown. So I introduced her to her, and of course she and I became obsessed with this show about nothing that somehow was great and fun. Another thing that I was really proud of, I introduced her to a book once that I had just read and loved, and I just thought it was an interesting book, and we were talking, as you do with Lee, about everything, and I said, "Oh, you have to read this book. It's called The Spirit Catches Me, and I Fall Down." And I just thought it was an interesting book. But later, she, of course, took that book and put it into this course she taught called The Multicultural Self, and she had found truths and lessons in that book that I had totally missed. As has also been mentioned, she had an obsession with children's books, and she shared several of her favorites with me and with my husband, with whom she shared a special bond over children's books. He, too, really loves a really good children's book. And I want to end by talking about one of the most incredible ones to which she introduced us, which was called The Three Questions. And it's this beautiful picture book by John Muth. It's based on a Chekhov story. And she turned that book also into one of her amazing speeches. I think she delivered it multiple times. I saw her deliver it once, and as Anne mentioned, it was one of those speeches where she used a simple story to spin out a set of lessons that were totally perfect for the occasion, captured in this frame of three powerful questions that all students and people ask in their lives. She made people laugh, she made people cry, she made people think, and of course everybody stood up and cheered at the end of it. There are lots of stories like that. I actually couldn't find the book. The book is in a box, so that's somewhere and I couldn't find it. Somebody may know the questions. It's something like, where should I be? Who should I love? And what is the most important thing? They were these like really fundamental, deep questions that a little boy was asking and that she then spun out into this spectacular speech. So I just want to end by saying that I miss Lee every day. And I know that I'm never going to live up to that standard of hers as a friend, a teacher, or a learner, but I promise you I will always try to remember the lessons you taught me and the joy and the happiness you brought. Thank you.
I might apologize, but it's actually a sign of the wonderful diversity of people here that even though I am the mistress of ceremonies, I don't personally know all the speakers, so I apologize to you in advance if I look vaguely after I introduce you. Milton Bennett, Lee taught with him for many years. He's now the director of Intercultural Development Research Institute, which is based in Milan, Italy, and is a good friend.
So I first met Lee when she was invited to be a keynote speaker at the Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication, which is a program that she was affiliated with for many years in Portland, Oregon. And it was a good speech, as I'm sure you all know. But the thing I recall about it is it made me cry. And you know, I cry at movies and I cry about television. I hardly ever cry at speeches. It was amazing, and so I said, I must meet this person, and then the predictable thing that all of you have been describing occurred. I'm here today not only on my own recognizance, but also representing my wife, Ida Castiglione, and our son, Leonardo Bennett, who are with us at this very moment in their thoughts. Just talked to them before I came from Italy. We talked about what we could do to best honor and remember Lee, and we decided, since she was the consummate educator, that we should think about the lessons that she left us. And so I'd like to do that by suggesting three qualities that Lee has brought with us. And thank you, Evie, so much for the opportunity to be able to do this. Three qualities that she represented in her life, I think, and our personal experiences with those qualities. First, Lee was courageous. And not only physically, she had the courage to face physical challenges that I think many of us would have overcome us long before they overcame Lee. But beyond that, she had the courage of integrity. And I think maybe that's the important lesson, that she had a lot of integrity. And my personal experience with that was when I was divorced and left eventually the institute that I co-founded with my former wife, who continued to work at that institute. Lee, who valued her relationship with Janet Bennett as well, said, I can be a bridge. I can move between the two of you. I love you both. And she was one of the few people who chose to do that. It was beautiful. She suffered some from that, in that situation from it. And but as time went on, I asked her if she would be willing to be the uncompensated third director of this research institute that you just heard mentioned. And she said, why, yes, she would. And I said, you understand this may put additional pressure on you. And she said, well, the chips will fall where they may. And they did, all of them. She basically lost all of her relationships with that other group. And so we talked about that several times. And I said, how do you feel about this? And should we try to correct this? And she said, no, it's not that I regret anything that I've done. And it's not that I'm mad at those people. It's just, there's a kind of narrowness of loyalty to a person rather than loyalty to a principle. And I thought that was an important lesson to remember. Second thing that you've heard people talk about here is her sensitivity, her empathic abilities, her, I would say, celebration of humanness. And my personal experience with that was that when my wife and I found out that we were going to have a child, the very first person that we talked to was her. The very first person we told was me. And she, I think, for the rest of her life, valued that. I know she talked about it a lot, and we did as well. We felt like that was the most important person that we could share that wonderful news with. It seems that having done that acted like a kind of bequeathal of godmotherliness to me, and so thereafter, I'm looking at Abby but I suspect that, she backstage with you, she was also talking about having responsibilities for Leonardo, and of course, that responsibility has been manifested several times. We have, for instance, the entire collection of Winnie the Pooh characters, big ones, and numbers of other things. So I'll get to that in the third principle, but mostly this sensitivity, I believe, to humanness was the basis of her ability to do the diversity work. That to me, diversity is not about just equity and justice, although it is, but it's about the attribution of common and full humanness to each other. And she was beautiful at doing that. And I think that has driven not only her ability, but the teachings that she has given to the rest of us about diversity in that area. Finally, I think that she was, and of course all of you have agreed, generous, given to the grand gesture. So not only do we have all the characters of Winnie the Pooh, but we have, I remember going shopping with one of these posh shops, for kids' clothing around here. I forgot the name of it here, somewhere in Georgetown it was. But someplace, it had wonderful clothes for kids. And the two of us were scratching our heads saying, about how large is Leonardo? And I was and we were having a lot of trouble trying to find a size. And so we eventually bought some stuff, and took it home. I think that was maybe 5 years ago. I think this year Leonardo is just beginning to wear it. One other time she said, what does he like doing now? I said, he likes Lego. And so I said, I'll get a little Lego set for him. And I said, oh, okay. And then pretty soon there's this huge box that shows up on our doorstep, and it's the Taj Mahal. And it's not like it's like practically full size, huge thing. So Leonardo is, of course, missing her a lot, not only for the gifts, but for this presence that he was bringing to her. And we miss her, we do. We miss her every day, but we treasure the gifts that she left us.
Thank you so much. This is a moment, as we've heard so many things about the gifts Lee has given us, for us to sit back and sing a little about those gifts. Lee loved Simple Gifts, the Shaker song. She loved it so much that she chose to play it at her mother's funeral. And Evie is going to play it now on the magic of Bluetooth, and we invite you all to sing along. The words are in the middle of your program collection. Yes, please stretch. Stand up, stretch, wiggle, anything you like, and when the music starts, sing.
gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come round where we ought to be. And when we are in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we won't be ashamed. To turn, 'twill be our delight, till by turning, we come round right. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come round where we ought to be. And when we are in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend.
I have to have a few mechanical glitches just to make it seem human, right? Lee would love that. So, Dawn Person is currently a professor in the Educational Leadership Department and the director of the Center for Research on Educational Access and Leadership at California State University, Fullerton, and she was a dear colleague of Lee's at Columbia Teachers College.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity, Abby, to speak about Lee and our time at Teachers College, where we were faculty members. This was in the early 1990s until I departed around 97. We were more than faculty members, though. We were also neighbors with only a hallway that separated us. And we were suite mates much of our time at Teachers College in our office. Lee and I shared a number of things in common, and I'd like to begin by talking about just a few of those things. We both knew and loved farm culture. We both loved to discuss and think about and imagine a world where equity, equality, and justice would reign. We both valued and loved experiencing a good laugh. I can see now that smile she had, the lean, how she would kind of twist her head and then chuckle. And she would look at me like, that was funny. We loved our families, we loved our faith, and we dearly loved our work. But as has been said earlier, and I'll repeat, no one could tell a story like Lee could. She could spin a story into all of her teaching. It was just kind of part of the fabric of how she taught us and helped us to understand truth. She would mesmerize audiences, whether it be a classroom of 10 to 20 students or keynoting a conference with thousands, holding on to her every word. Lee was the prime example of what Esther Lloyd Jones described as deeper teaching. She was so gifted at that deeper teaching piece. I remember one year Lee decided to bring William Perry to speak with our students at Teachers College. It was a highlight for those students as part of their educational experience there, and it gave Lee such joy to share a glimpse of her world with her students. Another highlight of working with Lee was the most unusual intellectual exchanges that we would have. Boy, when I think back on some of those now, it amazes me that I was able to get through them with her. I remember one time Lee and I were brainstorming a possible program to engage students in deeper, meaningful conversation about diversity and inclusion. It evolved into the spontaneous sharing of who we were. It was a tough conversation because we both became very vulnerable with each other. We talked about our beliefs, we shared our feelings, exposing points of departure in our lived experiences. As women, me as a woman of color, Lee as Lee and all that she encompassed. I won't even try to describe her in just a few words. But the next thing I knew, we thought that it would be a great idea to engage in this kind of conversation in front of our students. Hence, we designed a program called Difficult Dialogues. And we sat in front of people in a public forum and began to talk about the challenges of being who we were and navigating the world around us and trying to understand all the dimensions of who we were in relationship to this world and how to make sense and meaning of it. It was tough, it was challenging, it was hard, but Lee encouraged and supported me in that process. I should say, by the way, I was an assistant professor, non-tenured, and there were tenured faculty in the room for that presentation. Lee had a way of getting one to live life out loud. Like the poet Audre Lorde would say, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important, rather I am afraid. Lee helped us all to lean into our spaces of fear. Her strength strengthened those around her. She inspired us with her intellectual bravery, and she helped us to get beyond our fears. That force we knew and loved as Lee Knefelkamp has inspired us to continue to do the important work of nurturing and serving students. Lee's belief in the seamless curriculum is still taught today, as is her book on student development theory, and we will never lose sight of PTP. I have a signed copy from her now that says I have permission to do whatever I want to with it. My students at California get a chuckle out of that when they see that copy. That book is a roadmap for translating theory to practice, and we learned so much about ourselves and the kinds of programs and services that we offer through that work. Lee once gave me a card, speaking of gifts from Lee, and I still have that verse displayed on my bedroom in daily view as I walk out of my bedroom each day that says, "Live life out loud. Dance as though no one's watching." I'm glad we all had the opportunity to learn with Lee, and we're continuing the dance in honor of her legacy. Truth and hope, learning through the fear and the pain. Be well, Lee. We are better because of you. You lived your minute well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May we all have some of Lee's generous courage. Martha Sherman was an early student of Lee's at the University of Maryland in counseling and student personnel. And now, appropriately, this is a wonderfully woven theme here, she is a reviewer of dance performances for the Dance View Times.
Well, two things I will say that aren't prepared. One is I love that although I haven't met any of you who have spoken, I so know those stories. It is, and my stories will, this is a woman of such integrity. Everything was so woven and true about her. It's just beyond marvelous. I was reminded at an exhibit about his life and work of a well-known lyric by Leonard Cohen that really made me think of Lee. It goes, "Ring the bells you still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." Lee was my remarkable teacher too. I can't, other than you, I think that I knew her the longest of the speakers. She was my teacher in 1976, very early on in her career. She was incredible from the start, a remarkable teacher and advisor, and I was privileged to work with her and a team of graduate students, and including Linda Clement, who is here today and who I hadn't seen in a while. We called the course 498H, and to this day, that's how we refer to each other. We were all transformed by it. Lee was an alchemist. She would take material and magically transform it and us, and we would have followed her anywhere. So I have two quick stories I wanted to tell. One was I finished all my coursework, and I finished the research for my master's thesis in the 2 years that I was supposed to, but I hadn't finished writing the master's thesis, and I got a great job. With her help, I went up to Cornell to run the Living Learning Center for Creative and Performing Arts. And I love the arts, although it's not what I did professionally, and everything comes around. And it was a terrific year, but I worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. I loved it, but I did not write a word of my master's thesis. And in March of the September to September year, of the beginning of a 2-year commitment, Lee called me, and she was worried about me. She said, you know, if you don't finish your writing within I think it had to be by December of that year, because I had already passed my comps, you're not going to get your degree, and you need to get your degree. But I couldn't leave Cornell, and she flew up to Ithaca to take me out to dinner. And Ithaca has great restaurants because there's a hotel and restaurant school. And we went to a great place and looked at the menu, and she said, oh, they have escargot. And I said, ugh, I've never eaten escargot. You know, snails. And she said, you've never eaten escargot. You must eat escargot. And we ordered them, and they came, and I tried one of hers, and it's kind of weird, but in fact, it was delicious. I'm still sure it was the melted butter, but anything, you know. And we had this long conversation, and I really got it, and I had things to think about, and I don't know how she did it. Speak of gifts, and Dawn, speak of cards that meant something. 3 days later, I got a card in the mail, and on the front, there was this goofy little stick figure picture of a girl with curly hair, and the front of the card said, making a big decision is like eating escargot for the first time. And I opened up the card, and it said, at first you think you couldn't possibly, and then you're really glad you did. It was unbelievable. It was just prescient, and I did make the decision, and I did leave Cornell, and I did finish my master's degree, and it started me out on a career that in fact would have been different had I not done that important thing and made that important decision. Well, a lot of you have talked about what a remarkable intellect Lee was, what an incredible teacher, what a good friend, what a great gift giver. I wasn't sure anybody was going to talk about her Judaism, so my other story is about that, and I'm really glad to meet you, Bob, and to hear your story. I like to think that I was actually one of the things that led her to a faith that was very important to her and that she was meant to find. At Passover, I always, during my youth, would bring people home to have Seder with my family, my wonderful, warm parents in Wilmington, Delaware. And Linda and Lee and the 498H team all came that year. And Lee had never been to a Seder. And she found it quite stunning. And I remember afterwards she talked to me about one concept that really moved her. And the word in Hebrew for Egypt is Mitzrayim. And the word Mitzrayim, the root of it, means the narrow place. And what we're told in the Seder is not to celebrate this as if we were celebrating a memory, but to celebrate as if we ourselves were freed from slavery. And the way it reads is that we are freed from Mitzrayim, from the narrow place, that all of us have narrow places, and all of us must be freed. And it so spoke to her that she started to read. She began to study. When she called and told me she was converting, it did not surprise me at all. She had what those of us who are Jewish would call a true Yiddish neshama, a true Jewish soul. There's another thing that the rabbis say that I have always associated with Lee, and that is the purpose for people on this earth is tikkun olam, which means the healing of the world. And if there was anyone for whom that was a description, it was our friend Lee. It was the reason she was put here. She really understood that there is a crack in everything, and there is a crack in all of us. And she brought in the light, and she healed us all. I miss her too.
Alchemy. Thank you for Lee the Alchemist. So, Lee loved Debbie Friedman's songs, and she listened to them over and over again. And the text of this one, the Kaddish D'Rabbanan, dedicated to teachers and students, seemed especially appropriate. It's not a song that a lot of us know and can sing, but we will listen to Debbie Friedman if we're lucky. There's a crack in everything. You have the words in your program. Another perfect alchemical choice. Seth Beck Jollis, actor, singer, dancer, photographer, second-year student at Wagner College on Staten Island, and grandson, will come and say some words about his grandma Lee.
I think sometimes there's a few people in the existence that each of us has who is able to reach beyond a surface level connection without trying, without making it clear that they've done some research on you, right? That they know what your interests are, that they want to relate to you in some way. And at a young age, Lee had no need to ask my parents what my interests were or do some deep intellectual dive with a 4-year-old. She was able to understand innately who I was. And that was unimaginably important to my development into the person I am today. There's a very specific instance I'm referencing, and that is, as a young kid, I would be in a lot of musicals. They were rather underproduced and not overwhelming in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes I would get a lead, like Aladdin in Aladdin, and sometimes I would be a tree in Alice in Wonderland. Either way, the performances themselves would be videoed. At this time, Lee was serving as a professor at Columbia, and wasn't able to come to these performances, understandably so. And so we would send a copy of the DVD over to New York City. And after the video would make its way to New York, about, I'd say a week later, a review would come back. And these reviews were titled from the Columbia Review. And as a little kid who idolized Broadway and theater and the performers on the stage, Columbia and its place in New York City held a special place in my heart. And when I would receive a letter from the Columbia Review reviewing my performance in this in this incredible production, it meant the world to me. And whether I was playing that tree or Aladdin, it didn't matter. The review would always cover fairly the production, with always this filter of grandmotherly love. And this story might sound personal to me, and that's because it is, but it is not personal in its essence. Its essence is that gift which many of you have spoken to, that undefinable loving quality that Lee brought to every individual who sits in this room. And it is not a story that is unique to me or you, but it is everyone who Lee came into contact with, who had the privilege to work beside, along with Lee. And I am so thankful for that, and I know as well we all are. Thank you.
There's nothing to say. Thank you, Seth. Our final planned and announced speaker is Ellen Cull, Lee's very close friend, owner of a consulting practice in organizational development and group facilitation, and also a teacher of Sanskrit. Ellen, where are you? There you are.
So I've had to regroup completely because so many of you spoke to the things I was going to say early, and I started asking myself, so what part of Lee, what aspects of Lee that I know have not been brought into this room yet? And so forgive me if this is a little unscripted, but I thought of 3 really important ones that I want to share. So my partner Michelle and I we're friends with Evie and Lee for 25 years. I have to say, so many of you knew Lee in her professional life. It took me probably 15 of those 25 years to know that she was a big deal. I really didn't. I mean, she was Lee. We spent a lot of time together. She was a great friend, but I had no idea. And slowly over time, I got to know that. But you all have covered that. So 3 aspects of the time that we spent with her that I want to bring here. I'll speak to you briefly. One is intimate dinners and cooking. I don't think anyone's talked about her cooking. Oh, she loved to cook, and she loved spending time in small groups. I mean, more often than not, the time we spent was the 4 of us, with Evie and Lee and Michelle and myself, sometimes at restaurants, but often either at our house for dinner or at their house for dinner. And especially if I have to call out one dinner, it would be New Year's Eve. We spent most of the New Year's Eves in those 25 years with Evie and Lee, and Lee would make her lobster bisque. So some of you had that lobster bisque. It was extraordinary, and it wasn't just extraordinary in how incredibly delicious it was, but the care she took, the love she put into it, the process. She had a process. She talked me through it once, and I still wish I had written it down because I don't remember it, what she did and what steps, but I couldn't recreate it anyway. So that was one of the amazing things from the friendship with Lee. Another thing that I don't think anyone's spoken to is hospitals. So some of you probably know that Lee's health was not great. My partner Michelle's health is not great. We've all had medical things. Well, yeah, we've all had medical things. We spent a fair amount of time together in hospitals. I can remember 3 of them distinctly, I think. I remember that Evie and Lee were there with me at one point when Michelle was in the hospital. I'm pretty sure I was there with Lee once when Evie was in the hospital. I have a pretty distinct memory of that, and I distinctly remember us being with Evie when Lee had her heart surgery. And those times were incredibly important and very special, and there was never any doubt that she would be there if there was any way she could, if there was a medical emergency, or if we needed her there. And then the other thing that we shared, I think some of you have spoken to a bit, but we shared major life events. And the one that comes first to my mind is our marriages. So, you might know that it was only in 2010 that it became legal in the district for same-sex couples to marry. And so it became legal, if I remember right, Abby, on Monday. You guys got married on Tuesday. So they had an actual wedding ceremony in their home. Small, small, very small. Some of you were there, but not many. It was very small. And then we just went to the chambers of a judge that Michelle had clerked with and got married on Wednesday, and then they came and met us. And so there were a number of those kinds of things that we shared, and those were very special, and that's what I remember. But in closing up, we, like many of you, apparently, were gifted with illustrated books by Lee. We have a collection. And I read through all of them a couple weeks ago, thinking about this, and chose one to read with you. It's quite short in terms of words. It's called To Everything There Is a Season. It takes passages from the book of Ecclesiastes that many of us will know, that speak to the universality of the human condition and are paired with images in the styles of cultural traditions from around the world in over 4,000 years. And I know many of them had personal significance for Lee. So at the beginning, inspired by Irish illustrated manuscripts, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. By ancient Egyptian wall murals, a time to be born and a time to die. By Japanese woodblock prints, a time to plant and to pluck up that which is planted. From mixed text screenfold picture books, a time to kill and a time to heal. Greek classical vase paintings, a time to break down and a time to build up. Ancient Indian manuscripts, a time to weep and a time to laugh. In the style of medieval German woodcut art, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Anasazi mural paintings, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. From Ethiopian illustrated books, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Siamese shadow puppets, a time to get and a time to lose. In the style of Chinese silk paintings, a time to keep and a time to cast away. And Russian icons, a time to rend and a time to sew. From Australian Aboriginal bark painting, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. From Inuit stone-cut art, a time to love and a time to hate. And Iranian miniatures, a time of war and a time of peace. And the earth, as seen from outer space, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever.
We have come to the point where all of our wonderful speakers so far have given us so many stories that the inevitable has happened. Each of us who knew and loved Lee has remembered many other stories. And we have a little bit of time that we'd like to invite some of you to tell stories here, and the rest, I hope, downstairs at the reception or at some point. But please, if there's anyone now who would like to tell a story, to contribute something to this wonderful picture of Lee, this is the moment. Eddie, and I will have a microphone if anyone wishes or is unable to come up front.
I'm Evelyn's brother, and therefore Lee was my sister-in-law. And there's a possibility at memorials to have things sugar-coated. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just tell you this one little tale. I would come to visit Evie and Lee, and in every closet there was another prestigious, gorgeous cap and gown. And on the dining room table before I got to the kitchen, it was littered with academic works in progress. And of course, I went to the kitchen, and there's Lee cooking up a storm, watching the stupidest television known to mankind. And so the dichotomy was a bit much, but anyway.
Thank you, Eddie. Would someone else like to share something? And please just tell us your names, since we have the opportunity to meet so many new people today.
So my name's Ann Fleck Henderson, and I was a colleague and sister in the Perry Network with Lee. And this is a story from when she was just getting her doctorate, so quite a long time ago. And I worked with Bill Perry at a university in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he had heard that there was a student in Minnesota who had read a book he had written, well, the book he had written, The Intellectual and Ethical Development of Students in the College Years, and that she did her dissertation on that book in the typical Midwestern empiricist tradition, whereas he was in the New England theoretical tradition, and he was very nervous about what this woman he'd never met was going to do with his work by making it into a paper and pencil test and something you could measure, and it would stage people, would be very inhumane, and he was extremely nervous about it. So he had been invited, because she was a brave woman, to come and sit with her for her defense, and he had never met her. She had never met him. And so he prepared his speech, which he was going to give after she gave her defense, about why you couldn't do any of the things she had prepared herself to do, because it would completely take the soul out of the work that he had spent years developing about student development and learning in the college years. So he rehearsed this with a bunch of us, and then he went out to Minnesota to have this fiasco go forward. And he came back a few days later, a chastened man, and he said, you know, she presented her work, and she gave my speech. She said all the reasons why this could be risky and dangerous and could, you know, miss the soul of the work. And from that moment on, she became his colleague in presentations, you know, my sister in the work, although we hadn't yet met at that point. And I can't remember what year it was. It must have been late 1970s or something. Yes, it was before Evie came into the picture. So I thought I'd share that story.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren, and louder. My name is Lauren, and I met Evie in 1981 when a whole bunch of us formed the Jewish lesbian group. So I barely knew Lee. She was just Evie's partner. So I learned a lot today. But there is one important thing about Lee that nobody said. And I feel like it needs to be said, which is how much she loved Evie.
Sometimes the simplest things are left out. Please, thank you very much.
My name is Rochelle Pope, and I'm a professor now at the University at Buffalo. And what I really want to say is that Lee changed my life. And I was too young to know how deeply she changed it until much later. I first met Lee, unlike you, when I first met Lee, it was at a conference, and I knew who she was. We had read her book, and her book changed our field. And she was going to be giving a keynote at this speech later, but somehow they talked her into giving us a smaller, regular program session. And the room was packed with everybody from just out of grad school like me, probably a few grad students, out of the master's program, and a few grad students, and people who had been in the field for years, all piled into this room. and she was talking about something that was so brilliant. And people were responding and asking questions, and she was listening and making everyone feel like what they said was really important. And at some point, I raised my hand, again, because I was young and didn't know that you don't. I raised my hand and I said something, and it doesn't matter what I said. It mattered her response. She goes, "That was brilliant." And everyone in that room turned and looked at me. And my response was not to say another word for the entire conference because I didn't want them to hear the truth. Years later, after I got my doctorate, I worked for years and I went and got my doctorate. And again, being young, I thought I knew enough that I should teach. And I applied for a position at Columbia University, Teachers College. And Lee Knefelkamp was the chair of the program. And Dawn, the person who spoke earlier, and Lee hired me. I can't blame it on their youth, but I can blame it on my youth, thinking that I should be in the room with the two of them, that I could help to make this program that they were developing, that I had something to offer to it. Lee introduced me to the American Commitments Program. She introduced me to AAC&U, and somehow told these people that I should be speaking to the groups that they were having speak. And again, being young, I didn't realize what all that meant, but I went and did it. I knew it now. Later, John Mueller, Amy, and I wrote a book. And in our second book, by that time, I was old enough to figure out what was going on, and we dedicated that book to Lee. We just put out a new book in January, and we also dedicated that book to Lee because of what she did to change our field. But for me, it's what she did to change me, to help me see myself differently. She was an empowerer.
I think, given the time, we might have two more people tell up here. I'm so sorry that we're so low on time, but we also probably need to stretch and all of that. So let's have 1, 2.
Hi, I'm Debbie Rosenfeld, and I know Lee mostly through Evie, with whom I taught at the University of Maryland in the Women's Studies Department since 1989, although we've both been retired for a while now. And I have done work that's a little bit similar to Lee's work in diversity. I came to Maryland partly to do that work. And I knew Lee's work in its written form before I came and admired it a lot. And then one day I was able to hear Lee speak. And I thought, wow, how did she do that? And I think what I learned from listening to her and as I got to know her over the years, and it was an important lesson for me in doing that kind of work, is never to separate the heart from the intellect. It takes courage in academia to unite those. And from Lee, I watched her do that. I can't say I ever learned to do it as well as she did, but she was amazing at being able to unite and bring together the way people feel, the way they struggle, the way they are afraid of one another, and the intellectual bodies of knowledge that can inspire and teach them how to get past those fears. It was a very important lesson for me, listening to her. Although I will confess at the time there was a tinge of professional envy. The story that I want to tell, though, very quickly, is my daughter, who had some issues growing up, found a lot of peace in horseback riding. So in the occasions when she met Lee, that was a conversation, of course, that took place. It was a conversation about writing. So Evie and Lee came to my daughter's bat mitzvah, and Miranda got a lot, that's my daughter's name. Miranda got some nice donations in her name, and probably 4 or 5 mezuzahs and some Magen Davids. And then she was unwrapping, people have talked about the gift giving. She was unwrapping a beautiful velvet container. And I thought to myself, oh, another Magen David, great. But no, inside that package was an amazingly beautiful dressage tie pin and a gorgeous boot lapel pin. The first time Miranda wore them, she blue ribboned in a regional dressage contest. And for the rest of her riding life, which lasted several more years, she never, ever went into the ring without that tie pin and that lapel pin. She will not let me pass them on. She goes to that folded velveteen set of pins sometimes and touches them for strength. Thank you, Lee, wherever you are, for giving her something that she really needed at that time, and reminding that you not only have to unite intellect and heart, but you have to unite body as well as soul.
I'm Peggy Fitch, and I was one of Lee's students in 1980. She graciously accepted my application to the University of Maryland. I'm currently a professor emeritus of psychology and the Title IX coordinator at a small liberal arts college in Pella, Iowa, nestled at the foot of a windmill. In preparation for this opportunity, I wrote a letter to Lee. Now, I only wish I had written it in time for her to hear it, but here it is for all of you. Dear Lee, on a milestone birthday some years ago, I began thinking about writing letters to a few women who have been mentors to me. You were one of these women. It was you who believed in me, even when I did not believe in myself. The best example comes from that day at Briarcliff College during our spring break research team tour, when, after delivering an incoherent, rambling rendition of Perry's scheme to a gathering of bewildered nuns, you saved us all by calling for a break. I pulled you behind the rolling chalkboard in wide-eyed panic and stage whispered, "Too much too soon, too much too soon." I don't know how you didn't burst out laughing. Instead, you calmed me down and deftly brought the group back together, saying something like, "Let's review where we were." Thanks to your coaching, I have since then shared Perry's theory coherently and confidently many, many times. My second story. It was you who introduced me to Adrienne Rich and a quote from her essay on teaching language in Open University. It goes like this. Finally, as to trust, I think that simple as it may seem, it is worth saying that a fundamental belief in students is worth more than anything else. And that belief is not a sentimental matter. It is a very demanding matter of realistically conceiving a student where she or he is, and at the same time, never losing sight of where he or she may be. I will always be grateful for your trust and belief in me. On the last day of my classes taught at Central College all these years, I share this quote with students as a way to honor you and pay it forward. These are just two memorable ways you helped me become who I am today. I will always be deeply grateful for your care, vision, encouragement, patience, and fundamental belief in me. With love and appreciation for the person you were and still are through all of us. Shalom, Peggy Fitch.
Thank you all. We all now need each other's stories, and I'm sorry that we have to stop hearing them up here now, but I hope that when we have our reception downstairs, the first question you will ask everyone you don't know is, what's the story about Lee you were going to tell? In your program, you will find the words to Judy Chicago's poem, Merger Poem. We won't read it now because of time, but do know as you take it home with you that it was a poem that encapsulated Lee's hopes. Instead, I think we will close with a prayer she loved, the Mishabera. And if you'd all like to stand and stretch, and if my original team of Loretta, Sue, and Nina would come up here and help me, we'll sing.
Teach me to dance, will you?
Did you say dance? Come on, my boy.